My name is Jake Morrison, and for the past 8 months, I've been working as a night security guard at Westfield Commons, an abandoned shopping mall on the outskirts of Cleveland. What started as a simple job watching empty storefronts has become something I can't explain, something that's slowly driving me insane. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what's happening here, and because tomorrow night might be my last shift. Westfield Commons closed its doors to the public in 2019 after years of declining business. Like most dead malls across America, it fell victim to online shopping and changing consumer habits. The place that once bustled with families, teenagers, and shoppers now sits empty, a monument to a bygone era of American retail culture. The mall itself is massive, 2 levels with over 200 store spaces, a large food court, and several anchor department stores. During its heyday in the 1990s and early 2000s, it was the premier shopping destination for the entire region. Now most of the storefronts are gated with metal security barriers, their interiors stripped bare. The few remaining signs and decorations look like artifacts from another civilization. I took this job in March after being unemployed for 6 months. The pay isn't great, $15 an hour to walk around an empty building for 8 hours a night. But it's steady work with benefits, and honestly, I needed the solitude. My last job was in a busy warehouse where the constant noise and chaos had started to affect my mental health. The idea of spending quiet nights alone in a peaceful environment seemed perfect. The property management company, Clearwater Holdings, hired me to prevent vandalism and theft. Even though the mall is officially closed, there's still valuable copper wiring, fixtures, and equipment that scrappers might try to steal. My job is simple: patrol the building, check all entrances and exits, monitor the security cameras, and call the police if I see anything suspicious. During my first week, the job was exactly what I expected. I'd arrive at 10 p.m. when the day shift security guard, an older man named Frank, would brief me on anything noteworthy. Usually, there was nothing to report. I'd spend the night walking the empty corridors, checking doors, and reading books or watching videos on my phone during the quieter hours. The mall after hours is eerily beautiful in its own way. The skylights let in moonlight that creates long shadows across the tile floors. My footsteps echo through the vast spaces, and the only other sounds are the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional settling noise from the building structure. It felt like walking through a museum of recent history, preserved exactly as it was when the last customer walked out. For the first month, nothing unusual happened. I settled into a routine: arrive at 10 p.m., check in with Frank, do my initial perimeter walk, monitor the security cameras from the central office, and then do hourly patrols throughout the night. I'd clock out at 6 a.m. when Frank returned for the day shift. The security office is located on the 2nd level, overlooking the main concourse. It's a small room with banks of monitors showing feeds from 43 cameras positioned throughout the mall. There's a desk, a few chairs, a mini fridge, and a coffee maker. The setup is professional enough, though some of the equipment is clearly dated. It was during my 2nd month on the job that I first noticed the inconsistencies. I was doing my 2 a.m. patrol, walking through the east wing of the 1st floor, when I heard what sounded like music coming from somewhere deeper in the mall. It was faint, barely audible, but definitely there, some kind of soft instrumental music, the kind you might hear in an elevator or department store. I followed the sound, but the further I walked, the fainter it became. After about 10 minutes of searching, I couldn't hear it anymore. I assumed it was coming from outside, maybe from a radio in a security guard's car at one of the nearby businesses. But when I returned to the security office and checked the cameras, I saw something that made me pause. On camera 23, which monitors the old Radio Shack storefront, there appeared to be a light on inside the store, just a dim glow, but clearly visible against the darkness of the abandoned shop. I immediately grabbed my flashlight and headed down to investigate. The metal security gate in front of Radio Shack was locked, just as it should be. I shined my light through the gaps in the gate, but the interior was completely dark, no light source visible anywhere. When I returned to the security office and checked camera 23 again, the light was gone. I made a note in the logbook: 2:15 a.m., possible electrical issue in Radio Shack area. Light appeared on camera, but not visible during physical inspection. Then I tried to put it out of my mind. Over the next few weeks, Similar incidents occurred with increasing frequency. Lights that appeared on cameras but weren't visible in person. Sounds that seemed to come from empty stores. The music, which I heard at least once a week, always from a different location. I started keeping a more detailed log of these incidents. March 28th, 1:45 a.m. Music heard near former Spencer's location. Investigation found nothing. April 2nd, 3:20 a.m. Camera 17 showed movement in old Brookstone store. Physical check revealed empty space. April 5th, 2:30 a.m. Sounds like machinery running from direction of former Sears. Building maintenance confirmed no active equipment in that area. April 12th, 4:15 a.m. Multiple cameras showed lights in various stores simultaneously. All locations dark during patrol. I mentioned these incidents to Frank during our shift changes, but he just shrugged them off. Old building, old wiring, he said. Sometimes the cameras pick up interference from cell towers or radio signals, and sound travels weird in a place this big. Wouldn't worry about it too much. Frank had been working security at various locations for over 20 years, so I trusted his experience. But privately, I was becoming more and more convinced that something unusual was happening. The first major incident occurred on April 18th, about 6 weeks into my employment. I was doing my midnight patrol, walking through the main concourse on the first level. The concourse is the largest open area in the mall, with a high ceiling and a decorative fountain in the center that hasn't run water in years. My footsteps echoed loudly in the vast space as I made my way toward the west wing. As I passed the old Victoria's Secret, I heard a sound that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was laughter, specifically the laughter of children, multiple children, giggling and playing somewhere nearby. I stood perfectly still, listening. The laughter was coming from the direction of the former KB Toys store, about 50 feet away. It sounded like kids playing hide and seek or tag, the kind of joyful, carefree laughter you'd expect to hear during the mall's busier days. But there were no children in the mall. The building was locked down tight, and I was the only person inside. I approached the KB Toys storefront slowly, my heart rate increasing with each step. The laughter grew louder as I got closer, definitely coming from inside the empty store. I could distinguish at least 3 or 4 different voices, all children, all having a wonderful time playing some kind of game. The security gate in front of KB Toys was locked, just like all the others. I shined my flashlight through the gaps, illuminating the empty interior. No children, no movement, no sign that anyone had been there, but I could still hear them laughing. I stood there for several minutes, listening to invisible children play in an empty store. The sound was clear and unmistakable, not some acoustic illusion or trick of the mind. These were real voices, real laughter, coming from inside a space I could see was completely vacant. Then abruptly, the laughter stopped. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt oppressive. I returned to the security office and immediately checked the cameras. Camera 31, which monitors the KB Toys area, showed nothing but an empty storefront. I rewound the footage to when I was standing there, and I could see myself on the screen, alone, shining my flashlight into the store. But the audio feed from that camera had recorded something. When I listened back to the timestamp when I was at the store, I could hear my own breathing and footsteps, and underneath that, very faintly, the sound of children laughing. I saved that audio file to a flash drive and listened to it dozens of times over the next few days. The laughter was definitely there, captured by the security system, proof that I wasn't imagining things. That incident changed everything for me. I was no longer dealing with minor anomalies that could be explained away as equipment malfunctions or acoustic tricks. I had recorded evidence of something supernatural happening in the mall. I started researching the history of Westfield Commons, looking for any incidents that might explain what I was experiencing. I spent my off hours at the local library, searching through newspaper archives and public records. What I found was disturbing. The mall had experienced several tragic incidents during its operational years. In 1998, a 7-year-old girl named Emma Rodriguez had wandered away from her parents during a busy Saturday afternoon. Security cameras showed her entering the KB Toys store, but she was never seen leaving. Despite extensive searches involving police, K9 units, and FBI investigators, Emma was never found. She was declared missing and presumed dead, though her body was never recovered. In 2003, an elderly man named Harold Chen suffered a fatal heart attack in the Radio Shack while shopping for batteries. He collapsed near the back of the store and wasn't discovered for several hours because the staff was busy with other customers. In 2011, a maintenance worker named Miguel Santos was killed in an accident involving the elevator system. He was performing routine maintenance when the elevator car malfunctioned and crushed him. The accident occurred during overnight hours when the mall was closed to the public. In 2016, just 3 years before the mall's closure, a teenage employee at Spencer's named Jessica Park died by suicide in the store's stockroom after her shift ended. She was found the next morning by the opening manager. 4 deaths spanning the mall's operational period, each in a different location, where I'd been experiencing unusual phenomena. The children's laughter was coming from KB Toys, where Emma Rodriguez was last seen alive. The mysterious lights had appeared most frequently in Radio Shack, where Harold Chen died. The sounds of machinery came from near the old Sears, which housed the elevator where Miguel Santos was killed. And the music I'd been hearing seemed to move around the mall, but it was often loudest near the former Spencer's location, where Jessica Park took her own life. I was beginning to understand that Westfield Commons wasn't just abandoned, it was haunted by the people who had died there. Armed with this knowledge, I approached my job differently. Instead of trying to dismiss the unusual occurrences, I started documenting them more carefully and trying to understand what the spirits were trying to communicate. On May 2nd, during my 1 a.m. patrol, I decided to try something different. When I reached the KB Toy store and heard the familiar sound of children laughing, I spoke aloud. "Emma, are you Emma Rodriguez?" The laughter stopped immediately, but then I heard a single voice, very faint, saying yes. "Emma, are you okay? Are you hurt? I can't find my mommy and daddy." My heart broke hearing that. This little girl had been lost in the mall for 25 years, still looking for her parents. "Emma, your mommy and daddy aren't here right now, but they love you very much. They've been looking for you for a very long time. Will you help me find them?" I didn't know how to answer that. How do you explain to a 7-year-old ghost that her parents are probably still alive, still grieving, still wondering what happened to their daughter? "I'll try to help you," I said finally. "But first, can you tell me what happened to you? How did you get lost?" There was a long pause, and then Emma's voice, smaller and sadder. "The bad man took me. He said he had puppies in the back room, but there were no puppies, just dark." A chill ran down my spine. Emma hadn't just wandered off and gotten lost. She'd been abducted. Someone had lured her away from her parents and taken her somewhere in the mall, where security cameras couldn't see. "Emma, where did the bad man take you?" Down where it's cold and dark, where the big boxes are." "The basement." The mall had a basement level used for storage and utilities, areas that weren't covered by security cameras in 1998. If someone had taken Emma down there, it would explain why she was never found. "Is that where you are now? In the basement?" "I don't know. It's always dark here. I want to go home." I spent the rest of that shift thinking about what Emma had told me. If she'd been murdered and her body hidden in the basement, that would explain why she was still trapped in the mall. But it also meant there might be physical evidence down there that could finally solve her disappearance. The next night, I brought a better flashlight and went looking for access to the basement level. I found a service door near the old Sears that led to a maintenance area. The door was supposed to be locked, but the lock was old and broken. I was able to force it open with some effort. The basement was exactly what Emma had described: cold, dark, and filled with storage boxes and abandoned equipment. The air was stale and had an unpleasant smell, like something had been rotting for a long time. I spent an hour searching through the maze of storage rooms and utility areas. In a far corner behind a wall of old Christmas decorations and mannequins, I found something that made my blood run cold. There was a small area that had been walled off with plywood and 2x4s, creating a hidden room about the size of a large closet. The wood was old and rotting, and I was able to pull away some of the boards to see inside. The smell that emerged was overwhelming, the unmistakable odor of death and decay. I shined my flashlight into the space and saw what remained of a small skeleton, still wearing the tattered remnants of a child's clothing. I immediately called the police. The investigation that followed was extensive. The coroner confirmed that the remains belonged to a young child who had been dead for approximately 25 years. DNA testing proved it was Emma Rodriguez. The makeshift room had been constructed to hide the body, and forensic investigators found evidence that Emma had been held there for some time before she died. It was a horrific discovery, but it finally gave Emma's family the closure they'd been seeking for over 2 decades. The police investigation into Emma's murder was reopened, but after 25 years, most of the potential suspects and witnesses were either dead or impossible to locate. However, the discovery of her body allowed her family to finally lay her to rest. After Emma's remains were removed from the mall and properly buried, the children's laughter stopped. I never heard her voice again, and Camera 31 no longer picked up any unusual audio from the KB Toys area. But the other spirits were still there. Harold Chen made his presence known through the lights that appeared on camera but not in person. I started talking to him during my patrols and gradually learned his story. Harold had been a retired electrical engineer who enjoyed tinkering with electronics as a hobby. The day he died, he'd been shopping for parts to repair an old radio. He'd felt chest pains while browsing the Radio Shack, but ignored them, thinking it was just indigestion. By the time he realized he was having a heart attack, it was too late to call for help. "I just wanted to finish my project," he told me one night, his voice coming through the security camera's audio feed. I was so close to getting that old radio working again. Harold's spirit seemed to be tied to his love of electronics. The lights I'd been seeing were his attempts to interact with the electrical systems in the mall. He wasn't trying to scare anyone. He was just doing what he'd always done, trying to fix things that were broken. I started bringing old electronic devices to work, broken radios, defunct calculators, anything that might interest Harold. I'd leave them near the Radio Shack, and often they'd be mysteriously repaired by the next night. Harold had found a way to continue his hobby even in death. Miguel Santos communicated through the sounds of machinery that seemed to come from the old Sears area. He'd been the mall's head maintenance supervisor for 15 years before the accident that killed him. He was a dedicated worker who took pride in keeping the building in perfect condition. The night he died, Miguel was performing an emergency repair on the elevator system. The elevator had been making unusual noises, and he wanted to fix the problem before the mall opened the next morning. But a software glitch caused the elevator car to move unexpectedly while he was working in the shaft, crushing him instantly. "This place was my responsibility," Miguel told me during one of our conversations. His voice seemed to come from the walls themselves, echoing through the empty corridors. "I can't leave until I know everything is working properly." Miguel's spirit was still trying to maintain the building, even though it was no longer in use. The machinery sounds I heard were his attempts to check and repair the mall systems. I started leaving maintenance reports for him, documenting any issues I noticed during my patrols. The problems would usually be mysteriously resolved by the next night. Jessica Park was the most troubled of the spirits. She had been 17 when she took her own life, struggling with depression and family problems that seemed insurmountable to someone so young. She'd worked at Spencer's for only 3 months before the tragedy occurred. Jessica communicated through the music that moved throughout the mall. It was always melancholy instrumental pieces, the kind of ambient music that would have played in the store where she worked. Sometimes I could hear her crying, a sound that broke my heart every time. "I didn't mean for it to hurt so much," she told me one night, her voice barely a whisper through the security system speakers. "I just wanted the pain to stop." Jessica's spirit seemed trapped by the despair she'd felt in her final moments. Unlike the others, who had found ways to continue the activities they'd loved in life, Jessica was stuck reliving the emotional turmoil that had led to her death. I tried to talk to her about the things she'd enjoyed when she was alive: music, art, spending time with friends. Gradually, she began to open up about her dreams and aspirations, the things she'd wanted to do with her life before the depression became overwhelming. "I wanted to be a music teacher," she told me. "I thought maybe I could help other kids who felt like I did." I started bringing my laptop to work and playing music for Jessica. Not the sad ambient pieces she'd been generating, but uplifting songs from artists she'd mentioned enjoying. Classical pieces, jazz standards, even some contemporary pop music that had been popular when she was alive. Slowly, the music in the mall began to change. Instead of the melancholy instrumentals, I started hearing more upbeat pieces, songs that reflected hope rather than despair. For several months, I continued my nightly conversations with the 4 spirits of Westfield Commons. We developed a strange but comforting routine. They were no longer frightening presences. They were friends, people who had become trapped in the mall by the circumstances of their deaths, but who still retained their humanity and their individual personalities. Emma found peace when her body was discovered and properly buried. Harold continued to repair electronic devices, finding joy in his eternal hobby. Miguel maintained the building's systems, taking pride in keeping everything running smoothly. And Jessica began to heal from the emotional wounds that had killed her, rediscovering her love of music and her dreams of helping others. But everything changed in October, 6 months after I'd first started communicating with the spirits. Clearwater Holdings announced that they'd found a buyer for the Westfield Commons property. A development company planned to demolish the entire mall and build a mixed-use complex with apartments, offices, and retail space. The demolition was scheduled to begin in January. When I told the spirits about the impending demolition, their reactions were intense and heartbreaking. "Where will we go?" Emma asked, her voice full of fear. "This is the only place I remember." "I can't leave," Miguel insisted. "This building is my responsibility. If they tear it down, I'll have failed in my duty." Harold seemed confused by the concept. "But there's still so much work to do, so many things that need fixing." Jessica was the most distressed. "I'm not ready to go. I just started feeling better. I don't want to die again." I realized that the demolition wasn't just going to destroy a building, it was going to displace 4 souls who had found some measure of peace in their afterlife existence. Over the next few weeks, the spirits became increasingly agitated. The gentle manifestations I'd grown accustomed to became more dramatic and unsettling. Lights would flicker violently throughout the mall. The sound of machinery became deafeningly loud. Music played at volumes that made my ears ring, and Emma's laughter took on a desperate, hysterical quality that was deeply disturbing. They were panicking, and their emotional distress was affecting their ability to control their supernatural abilities. The mall became a chaotic environment where the normal laws of physics seemed to break down regularly. I tried to research what options might exist for helping spirits transition to whatever comes after death, but most of the information I found was either religious doctrine or New Age mysticism, nothing practical or actionable. Then I had an idea. If the spirits were tied to the mall because of unfinished business or emotional attachments, maybe I could help them find closure before the demolition occurred. For Emma, closure had come when her body was found, and her family could finally grieve properly. But for the others, there might be different kinds of unfinished business. I started with Harold. During one of our conversations, I asked him about the radio project he'd been working on when he died. It was a 1940s Philco, he told me. Beautiful piece of engineering. I'd been restoring it for months, but I couldn't get the frequency modulation to work properly. I was so close to solving the problem. I asked if he remembered the model number and the specific issue he'd been trying to fix. Over several nights, Harold provided detailed technical information about the radio and the restoration work he'd been doing. I spent my days off visiting antique shops and online auction sites looking for a 1940s Philco radio that matched Harold's description. It took weeks, but I finally found one in similar condition to the one he'd been working on. I brought the radio to the mall and set it up near the old Radio Shack, along with a full set of restoration tools and replacement parts. I explained to Harold that this was his chance to finish the project he'd started 25 years ago. Over the next week, I watched in amazement as Harold worked on the radio through supernatural means. Parts would move by themselves, soldering would appear overnight, and the radio's components would be systematically replaced and upgraded. When the work was complete, the radio looked like it had just rolled off the assembly line in 1948. Harold turned it on, and beautiful, clear music filled the mall, a big band jazz piece from the radio's original era. "It's perfect," Harold said, his voice filled with satisfaction. "After all these years, it's finally perfect." That night, Harold's spirit found peace. The mysterious lights stopped appearing on the security cameras, and I never heard his voice again, but the radio continued to play, a testament to his skill and dedication. Next, I focused on Miguel. I asked him about his concerns regarding the building's maintenance and what would make him feel comfortable leaving. "The HVAC system needs a complete overhaul," he told me. "The electrical panels in the basement need updating. The roof has several leaks that will cause structural damage if they're not repaired. There's so much work that needs to be done." I realized that Miguel couldn't find peace while the building was in disrepair. In his mind, he was still responsible for maintaining the property, and the deterioration that had occurred since his death was a source of constant anxiety. I contacted Clearwater Holdings and explained that I'd noticed several maintenance issues that could pose safety hazards during the demolition process. I provided them with a detailed list of Miguel's concerns, framing them as potential problems that could slow down or complicate the demolition work. The property management company hired a contractor to address the most serious issues. Over the course of 2 weeks, the roof leaks were repaired, the electrical systems were updated, and the HVAC system was serviced and cleaned. Miguel supervised every aspect of the work, and I could sense his satisfaction as each problem was resolved. When the contractors finished their work, Miguel performed a final inspection of the entire building. "Everything is in order now," he told me. "The building is safe and properly maintained. I can rest." Like Harold before him, Miguel found peace and moved on to whatever comes after death. The sounds of machinery stopped, and the mall became quieter during my overnight patrols. Jessica was more challenging. Her unfinished business wasn't related to a specific project or responsibility. It was about healing from the emotional trauma that had led to her death. I continued playing music for her and encouraging her to talk about her dreams and aspirations. Gradually, she began to remember the things that had brought her joy before depression consumed her life. "I used to write songs," she told me one night. "Stupid teenage poetry set to guitar chords, but it made me feel better when I was sad. I brought a guitar to the mall and left it near the former Spencer's location. I also brought notebooks and pens, encouraging Jessica to try writing again. Over several weeks, Jessica began composing new music. I would find handwritten lyrics in the notebooks, and sometimes I could hear her playing the guitar when I passed by the Spencer's area. The music she created was beautiful, melancholy but hopeful, reflecting both her pain and her growth. The breakthrough came when Jessica told me about a song she'd written for other teenagers who were struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. I want to help them," she said. "I want them to know that it gets better, that the pain doesn't last forever." I suggested that maybe she could find peace by sharing her music with people who needed to hear it. Together, we developed a plan. I recorded Jessica's songs using my phone, capturing both her singing and guitar playing. The recordings were surprisingly clear, considering they were being made of a ghost's performance. I created an anonymous YouTube channel called Songs from Jessica and uploaded the recordings, along with information about depression resources and suicide prevention hotlines. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Jessica's music resonated with thousands of people who were struggling with mental health issues. The comments section of each video was filled with messages from listeners saying how much the songs had helped them, how they'd found hope and comfort in Jessica's words. Watching the positive impact of her music, Jessica finally found the peace that had eluded her in life. She realized that her death, while tragic, had given her the ability to help others in a way she never could have imagined. "I understand now," she told me during our final conversation. "My pain wasn't meaningless. It became something that could help other people. I'm ready to go." Jessica's spirit moved on, and the mall fell silent except for Harold's radio, which continued to play its vintage jazz music as a reminder of his successful restoration project. By December, 3 of the 4 spirits had found peace and moved on. Emma's body had been discovered and properly buried. Harold had completed his radio restoration. Miguel had seen the building properly maintained. Jessica had found a way to help others through her music. The mall felt different now, not empty, but peaceful. The oppressive atmosphere that had characterized my early months on the job was gone, replaced by a sense of completion and closure. The demolition was scheduled to begin on January 15th. My last shift would be January 14th, and then the building would be turned over to the construction crews. As that final night approached, I reflected on the 8 months I'd spent at Westfield Commons. What had started as a simple security job had become something much more meaningful, an opportunity to help 4 lost souls find peace and transition to whatever comes after death. I'd learned that ghosts aren't necessarily evil or frightening entities. They're people who became trapped by circumstances beyond their control, unable to move on because of unfinished business or unresolved emotions. With patience, understanding, and compassion, it's possible to help them find the closure they need. On my final night, January 14th, I did one last patrol of the entire mall. I visited each location where I'd encountered the spirits, remembering the conversations we'd had and the progress they'd made. At the old KB Toys, I left a small bouquet of flowers in memory of Emma Rodriguez. Her family had finally been able to hold a proper funeral, and her killer, while never identified, would face justice in whatever realm awaits those who harm children. At Radio Shack, Harold's radio was still playing, filling the empty store with the sound of 1940s big band music. The radio would likely be destroyed in the demolition, but Harold's spirit had already moved on, satisfied that he'd completed his final project. Near the old Sears, I left a small plaque I'd had made, honoring Miguel Santos for his 15 years of dedicated service to the mall. Even in death, he'd continued to care for the building he'd spent so much of his life maintaining. At Spencer's, I left the guitar and notebooks that Jessica had used to create her final songs. Her music was now helping people around the world, a legacy that would outlive both her physical death and the building where she'd taken her life. As I prepared to leave for the final time, I heard a sound I hadn't heard in months. Voices, all four of them speaking together. "Thank you," they said in unison. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for helping us find peace." I left Westfield Commons at 6 a.m. on January 15th, locking the doors behind me for the last time. By evening, the demolition crews would begin tearing down the building, but the spirits who had haunted it were already at rest. The construction of the new mixed-use development took 18 months. When it was completed, the site housed a modern apartment complex, several office buildings, and a small shopping center with restaurants and specialty stores. I visited the location on the first anniversary of the demolition. The new development was bustling with activity. Families walking to dinner, young professionals heading home from work, shoppers browsing the stores. It was alive in a way that the old mall hadn't been for years. There was no trace of the supernatural activity I'd experienced during my time as a security guard. The spirits of Westfield Commons had found their peace and moved on, leaving the site free for new lives and new stories to unfold. I kept Harold's radio, which somehow survived the demolition. It sits in my living room now, still playing those beautiful 1940s jazz standards. Sometimes, when I'm having a difficult day, I listen to Harold's music and remember the lessons I learned about death, closure, and the power of compassion. Jessica's YouTube channel continues to help people struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. Her songs have been downloaded millions of times, and the comments section remains a supportive community where people share their stories and encourage one another. In death, Jessica achieved her dream of becoming a teacher who helps young people in crisis. I never returned to security work. The experience at Westfield Commons changed my perspective on life and death in ways that made it impossible to go back to routine jobs. I enrolled in college and studied counseling psychology with a focus on grief and trauma therapy. I now work as a counselor, specializing in helping people who have lost loved ones under tragic circumstances. My clients include parents who have lost children, families of suicide victims, and people struggling with unresolved grief. I don't tell them about my experiences with ghosts, but I use the insights I gained from helping lost spirits find peace. Sometimes people ask me if I believe in ghosts, if I think the dead can communicate with the living. I tell them that I believe consciousness is more complex and durable than we understand, and that love and connection can transcend physical death. But mostly, I tell them what I learned from Emma, Harold, Miguel, and Jessica, that everyone deserves to be heard, everyone deserves compassion, and everyone deserves the chance to find peace, whether they're living or dead. The abandoned shopping mall is gone now, but the lessons it taught me about empathy, closure, and the persistence of the human spirit continue to guide my work and my life. Sometimes the most important job you'll ever have is one you never expected to find, in a place you never thought you'd go, helping people you never imagined you'd meet, even if those people happen to be ghosts.